Welcome and good day, everyone, from wherever you happen to be logging in from. I'm David Cory, and I'm here with
Jill Cory.
and we're with the Emotional Intelligence Training Company. We are coaches and trainers, and we're going to tackle this fascinating topic of toxic masculinity. And a funny thing happened on the way to the webinar, and that was we thought we'd do one last little advertisement on Facebook for the webinar today, and we got these comments coming in, which we're going to show you. And these are kind of unbelievable and maybe not surprising to some of you. But let's just take a look at some of these comments. So this guy says, I'd like to attend, but will be at the shooting range teaching my kids windage and elevation, which I'm only imagining are aspects of shooting.
And what's interesting, disturbing about this one is that for over 30 years, I've worked in the area of violence against women. And what we know about toxic masculinity when it extends into being actually abusive is that there are always veiled threats of more. And I think he believes he can't say guns. And so he's found a way to make this kind of threatening statement without the use of a direct threat.
And the suggestion that this is what men do, masculine men teach their kids how to shoot guns. Here's one. This sounds like something I would have to be sentenced to by a judge.
Yeah. Yeah. This one has a cackle laugh, which is odd. I see a lot on the left that are simply ruled by emotions. It is humorous to behold. The world gets worse when men stop being masculine and making a difference. Standing back and being accepting in the face of evil is the path to abject failure.
And he's suggesting that we're being evil, and that we're standing back and accepting this evil, which is so weird. Here's a guy who says blocked. See how easy that was? And here's a guy who says toxic masculinity is a farce. It does not exist. And I thought, oh, well, maybe this guy's a professor and he's studied it and he's done some work in the area. And so I took a look at his Facebook page, and he runs a power washing business. And nothing against power washing. That's great that he's an entrepreneur, but he's really not in a position to comment.
Mm-hmm. Carry on.
And this is one of the interesting things about toxic masculinity, as we'll find out, is that there's a lot of denial about it.
Yeah, Andrea, thanks for that comment. That's what David and I were thinking as well. Ironically, they're exactly proving the hypothesis and showing that it does exist and exists in that whole range of petty and childish to dangerous and potentially very risky for people.
This guy, busy picking my nose. This guy trying to turn more men into women, and then he gives the finger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, I couldn't have planned this better. that people were going to demonstrate toxic masculinity in response to. Here's the same guy again. What this country really needs is some good old time-tested, contagious masculinity.
We looked it up. There really isn't such
really
a thing.
Isn't such a thing.
So
that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
So here's a guy. What a hoot. Our enemies are laughing at us, chomping at the bit, biding their time. This ideology, you nuts on the left, keep pushing, will be the end of America as we know it. You are so woke, you have become blind.
Yeah.
Like, just no clue, no idea.
Yeah. This is why we have a bunch of sissy-ass beta men walking around that is given orders by their significant others and cower before them. I would much rather be an alpha. I am the man of the house, and that is how it will stay. And somebody just offers Jesus H. Christ as a comment. So, and the one of the interesting things is how the site got flooded with these comments almost as soon as it was posted. And so, anyway, we're really setting a context for the urgency of addressing toxic masculinity. And our goal really is to help people just start naming what's actually underneath some of the behaviors of, in this case, men. And one of the interesting things as well, one of our peers and colleagues wrote us a note saying that he wouldn't be attending because he felt like this was blaming and he was all about empowerment. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but we just want to lay this framework that this isn't about blame. What we know is when we name problems, we can bring them to the surface, and then we can find solutions and actions and allies. When we don't, we end up with the Kamloops situation and the incredible racism. And so before we go further, I would just like to do a land acknowledgement. And for all of you, if you know the land that you're on, when you can type it into the chat box. And if you don't, we encourage you to find out what land and what territory you're on. So we just like to pause for a moment and acknowledge the land that we are on. David and I work and live on the WSÁNEĆ territories, what is now called North Saanich. The WSÁNEĆ people have lived on this land from time immemorial. We are grateful for their stewardship of this land. We also want to acknowledge the acts of colonization, such as the stealing of land, residential schools, stealing of and murdering of children, the high rates that continue of children, Indigenous children in care, and that this has created lasting inequities for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. We commit ourselves to the ongoing process, truth, reconciliation, and reparation. So we invite you, as you make comment in the chat box, to identify where you are and take a minute to think about, as we go through this, what the connection is between what's happened to those Indigenous children and the relationship to what we're talking about today.
Thanks, Jill. In the interest of time, we're going to carry on and launch our first poll. So when we launch the poll here, I would like you to, let's see, where's our poll is right there. And so you can only pick one answer. So pick the answer that best represents what your position. So don't know much about the topic. You were interested. You've seen how it's harmed people in workplaces, personally impacted. I want to be part of the solution. And other, please type in the chat box.
Thank you, everyone, for contributing to the land acknowledgement. Yeah, and so of course, we're aware that if you choose one of the others, you also may want to be part of the solution. So they are not exclusive categories. I'm just interested in the range of interests here today.
Too many men suffer in silence. Thank you for that comment. We are going to be addressing that.
Yeah, absolutely. It is one of the many tragic consequences of toxic masculinity is everyone suffers. And I think that was part of our disappointment in the comment from our colleague that this was about blaming. We truly believe that this is about helping everybody.
It's about awareness and understanding from our perspective. All right, so we've got an even split almost. It's interesting. Thank you so much for, I guess you can't see this unless I show it to you, but we've got about 20% of you said you didn't know much about the topic. 31% said you've seen how toxic masculinity has harmed people in workplaces. 15% said you've been personally impacted by toxic masculinity, and 27% said you want to be part of the solution. So thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Let's jump in here.
Yeah, and I noticed that a few people have already named some of what we'll be talking about, which is patriarchy and social norms. So thank you for laying some of the groundwork for that. Also, somebody noted that they're a coach in the military, and we've seen some of the effects of toxic masculinity in the military these days. So thank you. So today we're going to talk about why talk about it. And I think we demonstrated to some extent already the need for talking about it, but also correcting some misperceptions and gross interpretations of what the problem is. And we're going to talk a little bit about where it comes from, how to spot it, and how to tackle it. This is a light touch on all of this today. So there's lots of lots of articles and lots of information. It's not a new concept at all. We're going to talk a little bit again about impacts of toxic masculinity, both in workplaces and in society and globally more generally. And then we want to make the link between toxic masculinity and emotional intelligence, because as you know, we believe that emotional intelligence offers some fundamental skills that are essential for all human beings to interact with each other in a way that is counter to some of the characteristics and kind of principles of toxic masculinity. We offer a little bit in terms of taking action, as we know there's so much more than that, than what we can talk about today. Then we'll take some questions.
Someone asked if we could share the poll summary. Yes, I can share it afterward. I downloaded it, and so sorry I did read off the results, but I can share that with you afterward. All right, so let's take a look at the reasons to look at toxic masculinity. One of the number one reasons is people get hurt. We just wanted to acknowledge that people get hurt as a result. It creates hostile work environments, and it undermines inclusion, diversity, teams, equity, and fairness, all these things that we're trying to build now in workplaces. The idea of toxic masculinity runs counter to that.
Mm-hmm. And again, we assert that if we don't talk about this toxic masculinity and patriarchal notions and the social norms surrounding gender, we can't actually truly address the goals of inclusion, diversity, and equity. So we believe that this is a fundamental step to getting to those aspirations. We know that toxic masculinity is harmful to women and to gender nonconforming folks in particular. And we saw that sort of the reference to being women in the text
Trying to turn men into women.
Yeah, it couldn't be a worse statement for men who hold those toxic ideas of masculinity.
Yes.
We also just want to make sure that we're differentiating between toxic masculinity and masculinity, and sometimes those conflate, and we will take those apart a little bit. So we're not making a statement that men are toxic. We are aware that toxic masculinity contaminates organizational culture for sure. And why we've seen so much like the rise of reporting of sexual harassment and sexual abuse is because historically we've conflated harassment with masculinity, with masculine behavior. And so women have been silenced about naming the experience for them where it's been non-consensual and harmful.
Okay, thanks. So we're talking about authoritative leadership, and of course, there's something about the correlation or the idea of power in authoritative leadership, the hierarchical arrangements, and kind of like a permission for masculinity, and then of course its toxic effects to be demonstrated. And with respect to sexual harassment and abuse, often goes unreported because of fear of reprisal, fear of being re-victimized.
Yeah, fear, and the re-victimization can happen in lots of ways. It can be about blaming the victim for what happened. It can be about disbelieving or discrediting, and many other tactics. Which
Jill has worked on this idea of the harms of help, where the very systems that people go to get help are characterized by this toxic masculinity, which can re-victimize. So police, courts, on and on, and we'll make reference to some of that too. The more we research this subject, the more we realize there's a whole series here, and we just may create something like that. This cartoon is not funny at all, but it's very representative. It's this whole idea of a bunch of men sitting around talking about whether we should give women equality. It's funny and sad all at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the idea that we think those things are funny, I think obviously more of us bring more consciousness to those pieces and don't think it's funny. But I think one of the things that it tells us is that we all understand patriarchy, and we all understand how the fun sport it's been to mock women and recognize just the inherent nature of male power.
So here's the age old question in sociology: is it personal agency or is it social determinism? And Jill, tell them about this funny idea of 6,000, like typing into Google.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say what we're talking about here in the agency versus determinism is how much do we determine our own lives? How much are we independent from social norms, social constructs, social pressures, stereotypes, etc., and really make our own conscious choice about every aspect of our lives, and how much is determined by the social structures and constructs and constraints. And this truly has been, probably 100 years in sociological theory, one of the main tensions that people are exploring. And the reason we will never answer it is that we can't lock people up from birth and see how they grow up without the influence and shaping of society. So we know that patriarchy exists, and this research says it has existed for 6,000 years. And it's the reason they traced it back there is that's where they first gave fatherhood power. So switching from a matriarchal to a patriarchal system where men were given head of household power. And again, one of the text references or responses referenced that he was head of household, and that still continues to exist today. And we see again the effects of patriarchy on colonization. So this is not simply about women. This is also about it's about power. And so the system of socially organizing and valuing men over women also values white men over men and women of color, etc. So it's entrenched and it's invisible, and we rely on it every day. And it's familiar to our ears. It shapes our political system, and it shapes our medical system and our legal system. So this is, it's so invisible that we continue just to take it for granted as a way of organizing our lives. Masculinity in and of itself is a cultural or social norm and teaches men from birth how to behave and what's okay and not okay for them to feel, think, and do. And the concealing of patriarchy, we use language like it's traditional, it's conventional, it's just socialized, it's masculine. So it's depoliticizing what is truly a political concept, which is patriarchy. And we're inviting people to repoliticize it so that we can take action on it rather than have it accepted.
Without awareness, you might think it's just the way things are. So here's how we socialize masculinity. With respect to babies, you know the importance of emotional attachment, and we never talk about the role of patriarchy in helping parents protect their little boy children from this.
Yeah, and so we both say emotional attachment is critical, and up until the age of 6, that is really true for babies. But at the same time, boy children are getting the message, as we say, that like we give them a color at birth, and again, all of this is being challenged. So we're not suggesting that this has gone unnoticed by people, but there's still an inherent tension between some of what we know and how how powerful patriarchy continues to be in shaping. So we teach boys to shut down their emotions. At birth, we say, oh, he's going to be a football player. Oh, he looks like he's just so intelligent. And the research on boy and girl babies at birth is amazing in terms of the narratives that are attached to gender. It's a little bit like doing blind interviewing where you don't see the interview's gender and what difference that makes in terms of how they interpret the skills. It's similar with babies, that if you didn't know the gender, you wouldn't be able to say, oh, they look like a football player, or like one of our children was very big when they were born, and she did not turn out to be a football player, but without the, anyway, you get the point. So we teach children to be tough, boys to be tough, don't cry. We use lots of derogatory language like mama's boy to mean that like that's a bad thing, and boys learn that. And then we have lots of slurs that are homophobic slurs in particular, and femininity slurs as well. And then by the time adolescent boys we get there, we actually normalize antisocial behavior. that can turn over into rape. Young women between the ages of 18 and 25 are the highest risk group for being sexually assaulted and for being murdered by an abusive partner of the same age. So we're really, we normalize this masculine behavior, being tough in sports, being, learning how to hit and hurt people on the hockey rink, etc., and normalize that. We teach them to mask their feelings, and we ask them to surrender their emotional awareness. It's like, don't pay attention to your feelings. They're not helpful for you. And they start to reject female friendships that they had prior to that. Sorry. And then by the time adult men um, get to where they are, they've already carrying all these messages that emotions are not only irrelevant, but they're dangerous to them. So, and that they need to silence them. So the expectation now, males have to constantly to prove their value and worth. So we set up a power and control aspiration for them. Domineering is valued. Taking charge is seen as good leadership. Being daring, we know even just from insurance rates that men more than women take risks in
And the
driving.
GF Strong Hospital in
Right,
Vancouver is
right.
full of men
Yeah, yeah,
who are quadriplegics and paraplegics as
yeah,
a result of
yeah,
their sports.
yeah, yeah. And we have men who are emotionally shut down, and although they're risk takers, they're not risk takers in terms of their emotions.
And Nadine says it starts even before birth with gender reveal parties.
Absolutely.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
Nadine.
yeah. It's we're too old. We're too old for that, but it's baffling for us. Yeah. Yeah. And so if there was any doubt that gender still mattered, I think gender reveal parties are one of those indicators. Thanks for raising that, Nadine. Yeah. Yeah. So we have these characteristics of masculinity.
Yeah, we just thought it's really interesting to see that where we place importance as a society on men and women in different ways, and with respect to masculinity, again, this social construction that we make up, there's importance on strength, and therefore there's less tolerance for weakness for men. So you can't be a weak man. That those concepts should not go together, and again, when I say that, I say that's kind of the prevailing belief. That's what people believe. There's the belief that it's important for men to control their emotions, and therefore there's less tolerance for the expression of emotions. There's importance on self-sufficiency. Therefore, there's less tolerance on partnership. I remember when the book Women's Ways of Knowing came out, and there were something like eight authors, and I was thinking, how could there be eight authors for one book? I said I would never want to do that, and I thought, if I write a book, it's going to be just me, and that's kind of the way I've been socialized, to not partner and work with others in that way. Oh, sure, yeah.
Sorry.
Here, you.
There's a really good comment here about entitlement that I want to have a look at. Yeah. Do you think entitlement could be part of the matrix?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Entitlement is fundamental, and I think that's what we're trying to break down is really all the elements of toxic masculinity slash entitlement. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's this emphasis on an importance of heterosexuality. Therefore, there's so little tolerance among the masculine for gender non-binary, gender non-conforming, all manners of sexual preference other than heterosexuality, and then there's this importance of the hierarchy of power, of status, of dominance, and therefore matrix management, shared power is foreign and difficult and challenging for those who are truly bought into the masculine. There's a huge emphasis on winning and competition, which is kind of funny in our relationship because Jill's the competitive one and who likes to win, which I don't totally get. So that's
To be fair, I embrace collaboration as well. So I have a co-author.
In masculinity, there's this real importance on asserting yourself, on making sure that you get your needs met, etc. And so there's very little tolerance for passivity. And we see this in relationships between men in the workplace, among men and women, and it really messes with the workplace. And we'll talk about that momentarily.
We may have mentioned to people that we have my 91-year-old mother living with us, and there's a lot of noise going on upstairs. David may have to go check.
Let's talk about this fragile masculinity for a moment.
Yeah, there's a tremendous fear of being emasculated. And again, those text messages put that in context for us. And so this comments so many rules, and many of those rules are hidden and again very known to all of us. So we think we're making choices about what color dress shirt you put on, and we think it's courageous for men to wear pink or some of the colors that men are
Or even
wearing.
this shirt has flowers on it.
Ooh, nice.
Tell you how comfortable I am.
Yeah, but there are dress codes, and we know when men step outside those, and women as well. What colors you wear, what jobs you take, the relationships you can and can't have.
Chick flicks.
Yeah, chick flicks. Yeah,
Men, in a very derogative way, talk about chick flicks.
yeah. Preference for movies, not chick flicks. So more drama, more violence, more gratuitous violence.
Preferences for food. There is feminine food and masculine food, and masculine men do not want to be sipping, cocktails with little umbrellas that have fruit in them.
What happens in Mexico stays in Mexico. Communication styles, which we've referenced around being assertive and driven and competitive, roles that they play in organizations and in families and in communities, the sports, like being sporty, playing sports, following sports, and general well-being is so affected by this fragile masculinity that, and we don't always talk about the terrible and extensive negative impacts.
Yeah, thanks for your comments. Please keep those comments coming. They're really great. And yes, the cultural context, absolutely, Janet. We realize that there is a cultural context for this. In fact, Geert Hofstede has his cultural dimensions, and masculinity is one of those. And the more masculine the culture, the more likely you are to see the kinds of toxic masculinity that we're talking about.
Yeah, although there's also a lot of research that suggests that we just see masculinity or the toxic masculinity in other cultures because we're so accustomed and so have so sanctioned toxic masculinity in our own cultures that we don't see it in our own cultures, but we can see it in others. So we just have to be really careful when we go put a cultural lens on. So the characteristics of toxic masculinity, in some ways, I looked up what toxic means, and it means poisonous and contaminated. So it's like we've taken what's masculine and we've exaggerated these rigid gender roles to the extent that they're now very harmful to men themselves and to women. One of the things that is most disturbing is it leads to misogyny, which is the hatred of women. Imagine in our language that we have a definition of the hatred of women. So it's the devaluation of women. It leads to violence against women. We know violence against women is a global epidemic that far exceeds COVID, that far exceeds the opioid crisis.
According to the UN?
Yeah, according to UN and World Health
Organization.
Organization. Yeah, both. It's about misusing power over others. So there are places in all of our worlds where our power can be used for good. So this is about misusing power. It's about aggression, not about assertiveness, and aggression that can also be abusive. And abuse is often characterized by a pattern of ongoing power tactics. It's entitlement, which somebody mentioned earlier, about power and status. And these are kind of the bracket around all of this is at any cost, that toxic masculinity holds up these characteristics at any cost to anybody, including themselves. Suppression of emotions, that lots of literature suggests that men have two emotions, pride and anger, and hurting a man's pride can lead to that anger or rage. And it's one of the kind of unspoken rules of not attacking a man's pride. Also, and from an EI perspective, low empathy, which means that toxic men are not actually paying attention to their impact on others.
Just a humorous comment on low empathy. We have a saying in our household, every man for himself. And that came from the realization that whenever Jill goes into the kitchen, she always brings back a snack for both of us. Whenever I go into the kitchen, it's to look for a snack for myself. And that was completely unconscious, subconscious. I had no idea that I was even doing that until we talked about it. And it's kind of funny and sad at the same time.
We actually have a saying, every man, you look after I'll look after me and you'll look after me.
My partner does the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. And, these are characteristics of masculinity that they've been socialized out of concern for others. And that socialization out of concern for others has led to all kinds of harms because people in power who are hurting people don't have to pay attention to the impact. And that's the critical role of empathy, is understanding the impact that they're having, both in a decision and an action. Honest, it is hilarious, not hilarious. Absolutely. That's, yeah. And Dave says it laughingly, and we've totally addressed it as a serious, not problem, but it's an issue in our relationship. And we're constantly uncovering how gender plays a role in our relationship. And again, what we know is that in toxic masculinity, sexuality is not about intimacy, it's a form of dominance.
The idea that that men get sex and women give sex is just absolutely disgusting and true. That's the way I grew up.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Did everybody see the image?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the work that I do in the area of violence against women, we had an opportunity to work with the School of Social Work many decades ago now, and this continues to hold true in all the work that I do. That when abusive men came into a treatment program, they did a long interview before they came in and a long interview when they came out with the School of Social Work. And what the researchers, Mary Russell and others, identified is that abusive men hold this belief system of power and control. And the three beliefs that they hold so importantly are that they are central, that is, that everything revolves around them. So everything is revolving around them, that they are superior, and that they are deserving. So they're always, whatever they're doing, it's superior, and that they're deserving. So, Dave wants a snack in the kitchen. He deserves to have a snack. I want one. I think he deserves a snack. No.
And that's the humorous
Yeah.
look at it.
Yeah. And so what's very interesting about this is that it's invisible to all of us. We all think we're working from the right-hand side, which is the relationship belief system, where we're working.
Many women think that.
Yeah, many women and most men think that they're working in this connected, equal, and mutual paradigm. And toxic masculinity sits in this power and control belief system. So it points to a lot of things, including the surprise that women get when they realize that their partners are not interested in relationships in the same way that they are, that they actually think everything is about competition and winning and getting power over. So an example would be a woman says, come help me do dishes. And she's thinking, let's do something together and then we can go for a walk. And he hears it as, there's no goddamn way she's telling me what to do. So he hears it from this central perspective, and she is offering it as a connected perspective. So it's one of the things in leadership that we think is a really helpful framework to take there to really understand what's going on in terms of leaders' beliefs about their role in their relationships with others, whether they see everything as a competition that they have to win at and be better than, and at any cost stamp on people rising, or whether they're interested in connection, equality, and mutuality. There's so much more to say about this, but we really, from a time perspective, probably need to keep moving. Any questions or thoughts about that page? Yeah, so I see somebody's talking about narcissism. Can you just pull that out?
Sure.
The comment. I think there's research that men are.
Let's go back here. Let's pull this.
Yeah.
out.
So the narcissism, and that's a growing language. And it's interesting. One of the distinctions between abuse and men who use abuse in their relationships and narcissism is how widespread it is. So men who are abusive often target their partner and not necessarily are sort of abusive to others. Narcissism often matches many of the characteristics, but it's more widespread. And my own sense is that what we're calling toxic masculinity, they're calling narcissism. And the problem with narcissism is there's no solution to it. It's in the DSM as a mental health issue, but there's no solution. Whereas toxic masculinity, we believe that there are actions and solutions to it. And the reason, again, we point to the beliefs is we want to note how difficult it is for all of us to look at and change our beliefs, let alone a globe that adheres to patriarchy more or less, and how difficult that's going to be to shift our belief system. Yeah, and so this comment, it's not just about men who have been raised to feel entitled. It's also about women having been raised for so long to believe that they are not deserving. It's so complex, and that's why we have that other side. But even with women who've experienced abuse from a partner for a long time, still have the sense that it's not okay. They don't know what to do about it. Nobody's helped them name the problem, but they do. And but the thing is, women aren't actually interested in being deserving. They're really just interested in a mutual relationship where both sets of needs are looked after. So we're trying to get out of that parallelism of one or the other, and find that space where everybody gets to express kind of what's more natural for them in a context of connection and mutuality and respect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you know what we realized in looking at this research is that men and women both suffer when toxic masculinity perpetuates expectations that are restrictive and traumatizing, the toxicity to others includes the dominance when people are dominated by men. There's homophobia, misogyny, racism, and aggression. And it's toxic to men themselves. There's this suppression of emotion and disconnection from emotions, and therefore disconnection from others. And and bell hooks has this wonderful analogy, like men are invited to the table, but they don't necessarily come. And the table is the table of love, of family, of inclusion, of connection, and it's socially maladaptive or harmful to mental health.
And so we have, and I think Kim's also pointing to this, we have high rates of suicide, and by men, 3 to 3.5 times the rate of suicide compared to women. And it may be more. It's
Yeah, Kim
sometimes,
says 4 times.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I guess it's depending on the research, but we know it's high, and we know it's much higher than women. And so we need to start disaggregating gender to really find out what the impacts are for men and for women. 6 million American men have depression, 3 million have anxiety, but their rates of accessing support are much lower than that.
Yeah,
So,
and Karen points out the reason right
yeah,
there.
yeah,
The
yeah,
stigma.
yeah. Yeah, and
Feel like
so
it's
you can see the incredible setup that we've had for men, that they share, of course, the normal human responses to difficult times and difficult relationships and difficult experiences, but they aren't permitted to honor their masculinity. They're not permitted to express themselves or to get help, and this is truly a tragedy.
We've been reading this book by Bell Hooks, which is called "Willing to Change." This book is not that recent. She wrote it several years ago, and she says the first act of violence that patriarchy demands of males is not violence towards women. Instead, patriarchy demands of all males that they engage in acts of psychic self-mutilation, that they kill off the emotional parts of themselves. Now that may sound extreme, but just think about how we've socialized males to be big boys don't cry. You got to be tough. You got to be strong.
Man up
Man
is
up.
that idea.
All of these, pull on your big boy pants. All these things that we say to men, which actually cuts them off from their own emotions and connecting to others. And now we're to turn our attention to look at the connection with emotional intelligence.
Yeah, I just want to recognize that the most mass shootings in the U.S. are by angry men, mostly, yeah, who have no other outlet. And it's often, but not always, about violence against women, but it is often about losing their sense of entitlement, that somehow their sense of entitlement is no longer being fed, and their senses they're being left behind or forgotten. And that's a lot of the narrative in the far right in the US and in Canada right now, that they're somehow they're the things that they thought they were givens in terms of what they're entitled to are being taken from them. And if you think of the power and control model of that paradigm, when things are taken from them, they believe they're deserving of it without having to actually earn it. And so this then they rely on the only two emotions they have. Their pride is hurt, and they use rage to express it. So yeah.
Let's come back to Janet. Let's come back to Janet's question after we talk about emotional intelligence.
And what is it? Men are perpetuating this amongst themselves. Yeah, survival mechanism. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So recently, we've seen some profound examples of how power has been sanctioned, and the use of power has been sanctioned by men and has gone for decades unrecognized. So it didn't begin with the Me Too movement, but it raised to a new level of awareness the harms to women that have been going on for decades, and as women speak to it, and women come forward after 30 years. I've heard people say, like, why now? As if they're making it up or they should be over it. To me, what it's saying is how long lasting the effects of this level of like sexual, criminal sexual harassment and rape is for women, and the long lasting effects of it. Um, on the other side, we can look at still the low numbers of women in leadership. So that's another use of power where men let in men to levels of leadership and decision making rather than women. I think it's still
15% of all CEOs are women.
the notable criminal sexual abuse cases that are in front of us right now. Harvey Weinstein, Jeffrey Epstein, and Peter Nygard are three examples of men who have used extreme power over many women over many decades, and left behind.
Talk about central, superior, and deserving. I mean, there are three examples right there, and I think that central, superior, and deserving idea runs throughout all of this. And when the Me Too movement, really rose in prominence, many men of my age, including myself, go back over my sexual history. It's like, so were those willing partners? I mean, could any of them have said that I forced them? And I mean, and really, it's like, well, I mean, that we had different notions of consent, and of course now it's enthusiastic consent, and that's what's being promoted in on campuses everywhere, we just didn't talk about these things, so we didn't know, we didn't have the awareness to know better and do better.
Which is not what you're saying about these criminal offenses.
No, not at all. But it's caused, I think, many men my age, and I can only speak for myself, to actually think about, whether there was force or consent. And then this whole idea of the military. Again, we're socialized as men to we have the chat box in and out off of the screen, unfortunately. So that the idea that the military, RCMP, and policing are here is that this idea of being masculine has led to the toxic use of masculinity, and the deserving nature of senior military people, senior RCMP people, and the extensive use of violence and overuse of force and power by police. This is all as a result of what these individuals felt that were entitled to them, and that they were deserving of having, of doing, and of course the most tragic example, well, not the most tragic example, a recent tragic example is the 1-year anniversary of the murder of George Floyd on that was filmed by people standing by. So all of these things.
I see a comment here about there are too many men that are abusive, but unfortunately, there are way too many women that are abusive and damaging. And it's really a subject for another. I think we will probably have a webinar on the subject, but it's just there's no evidence to suggest that that's accurate. Women behave badly. That's absolutely for sure. But the distinction between bad behavior and abusive behavior is a significant one. Dave and I were last night trying to think about, is there any worldwide problem that women are responsible for? Yeah.
Nope.
No.
So when you say as abusive, no.
No. No.
Abusive, yes.
I think, and again, to me, abusive has some very particular meaning to it, and that is it's patterned, it's intentional, it's about gaining power. And so it's not about being mean, it's not necessarily even about bullying. So I'm very cautious about how I use the language of power. And the intention with abuse is always about gaining and maintaining power at any cost. And that is generally not how women are socialized. Does it happen? Absolutely. Is it minor in the scheme of the global epidemic of male violence? Yes. So we have COVID deniers, where there's a high link that we just read some research, a high link between men who score themselves high on masculine characteristics and who deny the existence of COVID and are anti-vaxxers. So again, much like the mental health access, masculinity somehow gets interpreted as denying anything that's a kind of social construct. And did you have something to
Yeah,
say?
just we're running out of time. I'm just looking at the time, and so let's just look at the time. A quick look at workplace impacts, and then we'll move into the connection with emotional intelligence. So we believe that toxic masculinity can impact negatively hiring and promotion. That there's a resource inequity within organizations. Those who are more dominant and exercise their power get more resources. There's this competitive winning at all costs. There's this idea of, want that there? This idea of suppressing emotions, so people don't really know what's going on. People are walking on eggshells. They engage in conflict in order to demonstrate strength. So I have more authoritative power over you. There's a tolerance and promotion of gender inequality. There's a subtle acceptance where toxic masculinity is in power and authority. There's the dominance and exploitation of women and other men by people in workplaces who have the power and authority. And there's the normalized and excused use of power and privilege.
Mm-hmm. And so to this comment that some women worship Trump, we're all socialized the same way. And we can see from ourselves that we haven't all accepted that deeply rigid way of thinking about gender, because lots of us are thinking outside that and beyond that. But there are, just like men who have taken the gender roles to the extreme, and remember that's our definition of toxic, so have women. And so we're all socialized, we're all swimming in the same waters of patriarchy. And we're all trying to make conscious choices. Some make conscious choice to use their masculinity in ways that are harmful, and lots of us make the decision to try to undo some of the gender socialization that we're experiencing.
So now we wanted to make the connection with emotional intelligence, and many of you know the model. Some of you may not, but this is the model that is the basis for the EQI, the Emotional Quotient Inventory, the first scientifically validated assessment for EQ in the world. And as some of you may also know, emotional intelligence has been identified by the World Economic Forum as a top employment skill, and so it's critical and important that we know more and learn more about emotional intelligence. And we use this model because it gives us many skills that we can coach people around and help them to be better and more effective leaders in the workplace. And we've been working at this for 23 years in organizations and with leaders around the world in both coaching and training. And so we want to take a look at we say that these skills are part nature and part nurture. You may be genetically predisposed to some, but we learn most of them, and that learning can also come from our social learning and the ways that we've been influenced by gender socialization. And that's the point that we want to make here. These we can find out where you are operating currently, but we also can dial these up and dial these down in a very interesting way, depending on the circumstances. And we want to look at that. Oh, okay. So what we may want to dial up in order to address and be more aware and face toxic masculinity is emotional self awareness, because again, traditionally this has been tamped down. It's like, don't pay attention to your emotions; those will just get you in trouble. Is kind of the traditional what people who embrace masculinity have come to believe, and also emotional expression. We have managers say, "Why do I have to express my emotions with other people?" And
Well, not only did they say, why do they have to, they say that's risky too.
it's risky, right? It's weak. It
Yeah.
exposes your weakness and your vulnerabilities, and absolutely it does. But with that, and then we want to make the case that with that comes great reward in terms of connection and relationships.
And again, you can see that when we think about those the paradigms of power and control and relationship, if there's no value placed on collaboration and respect and mutuality, then there's no incentive to buy into our argument that that improves relationships, because they don't believe that the relationships are important. So that's why we need to
Absolutely.
work at the beliefs level to get
Yes.
here.
We want to encourage men to dial up their empathy for others, because again, that can fall by the wayside when you're intent on building a company and getting investors and again, winning at all costs. You can forget about the people around you and the impact on them. So we want to encourage the dialing up of empathy and social responsibility. What can you give to others versus what can you take for yourself?
Mhm.
Which again is central, superior, and deserving, is kind of goes against some of these things that we encourage people to consider dialing up.
Mhm.
Reality testing. People are not out to get you. They're not out to destroy you. And there was one individual that an abusive man in a treatment group that Jill worked in, who said that he just couldn't believe that what his partner wanted was a mutual equal relationship.
Mhm. Yeah, he actually thought that we were inviting him into the world of Narnia, that he needed to step into the closet and find this fantasy world, that in his training, he had no concept that there was such a thing as mutual, respectful, and
Yeah.
equal. And he was a person who advocated for social justice. He worked overseas so it wasn't that he was numb to the social context, but he truly, his beliefs were so strong that central, superior, and deserving was everybody's reality. And so that therapeutic process was really about reality testing as well as the invitation to change. I just want to make note that people are identifying a few things like psychological safety in workplaces and gaslighting. We're not going to have time to talk about it, but I think Dave and I are already feeling like it would be fun to have a more
we have
interactive.
we have so much great content
Yeah.
left. Let's
Yeah.
get through this,
Yeah.
and
And
then
then we'll have an
yeah,
interactive webinar,
yeah,
to
absolutely.
follow up on this.
Okay, so what we need to encourage men to dial down is self-regard. This again, this idea of central, superior, and deserving. What if you were one of the team members, and this idea of assertiveness again? Just dial that down a bit. Dial up your empathy and dial down your assertiveness to find a better balance. And then dial down your independence and dial up your collaboration. And then finally, dial down your stress tolerance a bit, and then be more expressive about how stress may be affecting you and the stress that you're experiencing, acknowledging that others are experiencing that stress too. Okay, so let's look at our 4 A's, and then we'll have a couple of minutes left at the end to answer questions.
So the first thing is this question of allies, that we've all probably been bystanders, bystanders,
Standards.
standards, God, bystanders in observing the impacts of patriarchy. And so we're inviting men to be allies. Things will not change unless we have allies who name and fight for equality, inclusion, diversity, and it's everyone's responsibility to do that. Advocacy, use our voices, use our platform. And we can see in the last year how people have made use of the platforms, although from tragic harms, to actually push for more global and social and local change. So we are no longer fighting for our own role in an organization or our own status or our own land, but we're actually trying to reach equity. Equity means that we give enough we share our resources enough so that everybody has an opportunity to reach the same outcome, rather than equality, which is we give everyone the same thing and hope for the best. We know that vulnerable populations need more support. And here we reference psychological safety so that people feel like they can challenge the status quo.
Yeah, Ruben asked if anyone caught the 4 suggestions to dial down. We're going to send this PowerPoint to all of you, and we can even go back just for a quick sec.
Sure. So self-regard, assertiveness, independence, and stress tolerance are the 4 that we've identified. We could have made the list longer. David always is worried about too many words on a page. So you can add to that list as you sort of make sense of it for yourself. But those are 4 that seem very critical.
Okay, so here we want to talk about assessment, using a gender lens, including underrepresented stakeholders, looking at rewriting policies and including some of this language, including some of this analysis, and practices that change behaviors, beliefs, and opportunities for everyone. So again, that third A is assessment. And then finally, with respect to action, providing resources and programs, information like what we're trying to get by in this session here today, helping people to understand, building awareness, making the connection with what's already going on. In some of your workplaces, you're doing excellent work on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you may also be offering unconscious bias training, but this absolutely has to fit in within that framework.
Mm-hmm. Great.
All right, so yeah, we whipped through that very, very quickly, and of course, we could have had a 1-hour workshop on any one of these slides. And so you're so welcome for expanding thinking and offering a different way of thinking about some of these things, and for provoking thought. And we're gonna follow up with this and have a whole lot more. Any questions that you might have? Briefly discuss influence of education system in supporting the perpetuation. Yeah, I mean, Hugo, that's a great question and comment, and we're going to save all these comments. We'll send these to you as well, and it's about it's about understanding how these big systems, these big social structures are influenced by some of these issues. And
I would say more than influence, they are established on the basis of.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If we're being honest, it's established on the basis of, and we're talking about religion, the big ones: religion, healthcare, education, political system, the courts. And Jill tells me stories of how abusive men continue to abuse their ex-wives and partners through the toxically masculine court system, which supports their every move. And they want to get back at their partner, and the courts are ready, willing, and able to smack her down again and again.
Mm-hmm. Curious. Yeah, I mean, we are in our comfort zone here. Thank you, Hugo, for that. But we realize that the discomfort is in, getting those horrible responses back and being clear enough that we're okay with getting them.
Yeah, we frequently talk about the idea that we're evolving as a species, but some people are not. They're stuck in very traditional and old style beliefs. They choose not to challenge their belief systems, and you saw the evidence that those guys were able to type in, and they really believe that, and they are the supporters of a system of rule which is no good for anyone. And they believe that somehow that's going to be good for them. And
if you remember those emotions that were identified by the researcher, pride and anger or rage, those are the 2 things that we saw. Their pride is challenged or threatened. Their pride around their identity is masculine, and their response is rage. And I think that's unfortunately very characteristic.
Yeah, thanks everybody for your kind and supportive comments. Really, just great. Anger equals fear and shame. Thanks, Stacy. Yes, absolutely. It's a bit scary if you think of it. Absolutely, Cece. You're very welcome, Steve. Thanks for being here. Thanks to all of you for being here. There was a question. I wonder how many on the call are male. That's a good
Yeah.
question. We
Yeah.
haven't looked at
Yeah.
those stats.
I did a consultation process a number of years ago around the province looking at some issues around violence against women in mental health and addiction. And so the population that we were drawing from was certainly a lot of male professionals. And we had 4 males out of 454 people that attended the consultation. So, one of our first steps was identifying allies. And that means that men have to see this as harmful to them and that they want to stop women from feeling harmed and being harmed. So that's the ally step. Thank you.
Thanks so much for being here, everyone. It is the top of the hour, and we are going to say goodbye. As much as we hate to, we could talk about this for so much longer, but we will follow up with additional webinars. I hope you join us for our next webinar. We will certainly let you know. The woman speaking is Jill Cory. I am David Cory, and so thank you so much for being here. And take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Bye for now.